Hey everybody, it's Scott O'Mato back for another Minecraft video. Hope everybody's having a great day, guys. I'm having a great day. In this video, we're going to cover the full range of Optifine settings to get maximum FPS, all right? And be aware that Minecraft is going to get uglier and uglier each time we do this, but our frame rates will go up, all right? So you have to find that balance between beauty and function to find out what works best for your system, all right? So first of all, let's go into the edit screen here, and Optifine is found under video settings, and I'm using Optifine HD G5 Ultra, which is the current version for 1.16.4. all right, so here there's a number of settings that are available that you can use, but the most important setting when you're setting your frame rates is to turn off VSync. All right, VSync will lock the frame rate to your monitor refresh rate, so you need to turn that off to see the effects of your settings. And then you'll want to go under the other tab and choose show FPS. Don't really use the F3 screen as much because it's not quite as accurate because of the other processing and stuff that's going on. Now guys, I get very high frame rates on this machine, but we're going to increase them even more, so just you know, don't be discouraged by that. Don't compare it to your system in particular. These settings will up your frame rate on your machine. All right, so having set that, an important thing to just a side note is choose the biome wisely where you build your bases. All right, build your base in a plains, or even a savanna is decent, although it has big mountains. A desert's good. Guy, go ahead and just die. A desert is pretty high frame rates, you know, not very nice to live in. A plains is kind of the good compromise. All right, but one thing to be aware of is that fires can be created in the world. So when you first create a world, or if you have cheats enabled in your world, then you can turn off the fire tick. All right, so that is a very important setting if you're having frame rate issues, or you just don't want your forest burned down or whatever, because above ground lava pools can start fires, especially in forests, and fires can affect your frame rate quite a bit. All right, so that's a good setting to turn off. All right, so as I said, we'll increasingly degrade the performance of Minecraft, but the next important setting is your render distance. Now Optifine sets it to 8 chunks by default, and 8 chunks is a very playable range, so I tend to want to keep that there and then start to lessen other settings before doing render distance. All right, because again, it's a playability thing. Now you can go down lower, and especially if you're in your base, and in-game bases tend to be some of the most laggy things. So if you're inside your base, guys, inside a building, then don't worry about changing your chunk distance down, because you're not going to see it. All right, unless you have a huge base, it's not going to matter so much, but your frame rates will increase there at your base. Then when you go back out exploring, then up the render distance to a level that you can stand. Same thing if you're taking on dungeons or something like that, you know. And the end is a good place to reduce your render distance to get higher frame rates. You don't need it. The nether, when you're in a fortress, you know, so you can use it to your advantage to set it. And that is the same setting that has a big impact is your FOV. All right, your FOV setting actually has quite a bit of impact on your frame rates. All right, but it changes the overall feel, the speed of the player movement. But see, inside your base, when you're working with machines or you're building or something like that, you may not need to worry about that. So I mean, at its most extreme setting, it's hardly playable at all, but it ups your frame rates a lot because it's rendering less of a field of view in the world. Thus, frame rate is actually the time it takes to draw a frame. All right, and so how many of those frames can it draw per second? It's really a time measurement. All right, but you'll get an increased frame rate from FOV and a decreased frame rate from a high FOV, so just be aware of that. But again, it affects the overall playability of the world. 70 is the default. All right, that's considered normal. All right, so then the next setting you'll want to look at is the graphics setting. Now, a setting that you can make quickly that doesn't affect the world so much is the clouds. Is just turn off the clouds, guys. Make them or don't have them fancy. If you want a compromise, do fast, but turning clouds off doesn't really affect the overall beauty of the world as much as it has an impact on the settings, and it does have a significant impact. They've optimized them a little bit more, and Forge optimizes them. When you have Forge installed, which you're probably using to run Optifine, could possibly be using Fabric, but Forge does have a setting inside of it where it optimizes the clouds. So you're not going to see as big of an impact having Forge and Optifine installed as you normally would. All right, but that is an easy setting to make that has a big impact. All right, the next one you're going to look at is graphics. All right, your graphics levels. Now, be aware this is a macro setting, guys. It has effect on a number of parameters. So any of these parameters that say default here, all right, are affected by that graphics setting here. Rain, snow, trees, all that. So when you have it set to fancy, all those are set to fancy. When you set this to fast, now all of those are set to fast. All right, so you don't have to make any additional settings here. When it says default, it's talking about that setting back there, the default graphics setting. Okay, so that's a quick macro, and you'll get an increased frame rate substantially from doing that. But you know, the trees are uglier. But this is a setting that many people can live with. You can live with this compromise. It starts to look a bit like older Minecraft. All right, these settings like slowly take away features that Mojang has added over time, essentially, but give you an increased frame rate. All right, and you can make yourself feel better by looking completely up at the sky to see what your max frame rate is. You know, I'm getting around 3,000 there. Down about 2,500. So, but that's not going to really matter because you're not going to play the world looking at the sky or the ground. So it's in the world that matters. All right. But let's go ahead then, and having set that, the next setting that you could potentially look at that could have a big impact is the smooth lighting. All right. Now, smooth lighting also has a slider here. So if you don't want to go too extreme with it, then you can set it to a mid-level value. You can see the screen redraws behind it, and that will have some impact on frame rates, but not as extreme as completely turning it off. When you turn it off, you're really going back to an older look in Minecraft, but you can do that, and then just for safety's sake, turn that smooth lighting level completely off. And again, now we start to look like more alpha range Minecraft, which is appealing in some ways to some people. All right, so having made that setting, you can also take your brightness and move it all the way up to bright. And what that does is not have the lighting engine is one of the slower parts of Minecraft, although in 1.14 they threaded the lighting engine to give it a bit better performance. It still has an impact. So when you turn it up to bright, the lighting engine doesn't have to do as much calculations between extremes. All right, and an additional setting that doesn't make much of a difference visually to you as the player, but does have an impact on frame rate, is entity shadows. You could turn those off. Those are just the little circles that are underneath entities, and that takes a little bit of time to track the entities and draw below them. Again, not huge impact with that one. The settings that we've made up to this point with the graphics fast and all that have the biggest impact, beside the special settings in the performance area of Optifine. All right, a big one, and you're going to want it on whether you're getting good frame rates or not, is smart animations. All right, turn that on, and what that's going to do is any water, fire, any kind of animated thing that's not visible on the screen will not be rendered, and so that's going to up your frame rate quite a bit just by itself. That setting alone is going to up your frame rates quite a bit. Which, a quick note on frame rates, guys, is you're seeing here that there is two numbers up there on the FPS display. The first number is the current calculated frame rate. The second number is the average frame rates over a period of time. And I'm not quite sure how many samples and stuff that it's making, but it's your average frame rate. So your frame rates tend to go high and low. Now we're making quite a few drastic settings, so our average frame rates will tend to be lower. All right, but in the performance area, you can also turn on fast math, and it's kind of like the Better FPS mod that's in 1.12 and below, where it takes the sine and cosine, which are math functions that are used in a lot of things like animations and things, and used really throughout the code, and makes a faster version of them. All right, a version that has less impact. So that has some effect. It doesn't hurt to turn it on. Now, a big setting for some people, and it depends upon your particular CPU and to some degree your GPU, is fast render. All right, turning on fast render can have a big impact. All right, I get 200 or 300 frames from doing that. All right, but be aware that you cannot use shaders when you have fast render on, but it's not likely that you're going to want to run shaders if you're having significant FPS problems. But those two conflict with each other, those settings. All right, an additional setting that you can make in here, let's see, no, pretty much we've got there. One setting I wanted to mention that you do not want to turn on is smooth FPS. All right, you do not want to turn that on because it will reduce the highs and the lows, give you higher average frame rates, but it'll have you an overall lower frame rate because of that reason, because it's high, you know, less highs and lows. All right, now you can turn on dynamic updates, and dynamic updates means that more chunks will render, which rendering chunks is one of the most intensive operations, which, by the way, another quick recommendation is choose your seed wisely, because when you first go into the world, you have 12 chunks around you that are already rendered. Those are called your spawn chunks, and they don't have any additional impact. When the world loads, it's creating those chunks. Now, as you move off into the world, new chunks are drawing, and that can, of course, impact your performance. FPS, again, is the time it takes to draw frames, so the time it takes to draw chunks affects that. All right, so if you choose wisely in your spawn chunks, the biome that you want to build in, you know, if the world appeals to you right as you load it, and you want to build there, then you can get better frame rate overall. You know, less frame rate drops from exploring all over the place. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, another big setting that you can make is under details, and that is to turn the fog off. Now, turning the fog off has a pretty big visual impact in how chunks draw. So let's move out of spawn chunks here where the world starts drawing, and you'll see that not having fog gets all kinds of blocky floating blocks and stuff like that, especially on mountains that look kind of weird, that are normally hidden by the fog. All right, the fog is there to hide the drawing of the chunks. So when you turn off the fog, you do get better processing because it's not blending them together, but you're going to see chunks draw a bit more strangely, but it will give you more FPS to do so. All right, to turn that setting off. All right, so having made a lot of big settings, we can look at view bobbing. Now, this one has a big visual impact, and it has some frame rate impact. So it says for more realistic movement, but when using MIP maps, set it to off for best results. Now, MIP maps are under the quality tab, and they are by default set to the maximum value, and the MIP map type is nearest. All right. Now, what MIP maps are is it takes a number of frames and averages them together. All right, the number that is chosen by that slider, and off in the distance, those images are blended together to not make such a blocky image. When you have a low resolution, you know, your resolution kind of gets lower and lower because the pixels, the number of pixels drawn on the screen gets smaller and smaller at a distance, and so they can appear very blocky and thus jagged in the distance. MIP maps average those together, a number of images together to lessen that impact. All right, But this setting says that if you're using the map, set it to off, all right, and it'll have some impact on your frame rate. Now your character will just appear to just kind of float through the world. Again, some people prefer it because you don't have motion sickness or anything like that from it, but it feels kind of weird if you've been used to playing with this for a while. But it does have a frame rate impact to a degree, okay? Now you can also turn off the mip maps entirely, going under quality. Now when you turn off the mip maps, be aware that your resource packs and all that will reload. So go to the far left of the screen and click. So you just have to click once, all right, and it'll reload the resource packs and all that. Depending on your system, you know, that could take a little bit. But don't just grab the slider and move it, because it'll keep rewriting over and over again. But that'll have an impact too. But then again, off in the distance, you're going to have more jagged looking textures. It's a very subtle thing, so you probably in the real world performance won't notice it. Now many large mod packs disable mip maps because they can have problems with you know, different sets of mods and stuff like that. So that's a setting that you may be used to playing with, depending on mod packs and stuff. All right, so all right, we've got that under control now. So the next thing you'd probably want to start to look at is your animations. All right, now you can, thanks to Optifine, do each one of these by single. So the ones that matter the most, the ones that look the weirdest are turning off lava and water. Those look weird if you turn it off, but you can. Now turning off fire animated can be a very good thing, especially in the nether. Again, it looks weird, but it can have a strong impact. All right, smoke from campfires and stuff can have an impact. Flame animated, you know. So there's several ones. The water particles are rain particles and rain splashes. You can turn those off. Now another setting you can make in Optifine is you can do it either as a game rule. I'll show you the game rule, but you can turn off the weather in Optifine, and that can have a big impact. You can also turn off the day and night cycle, which will have some impact in Optifine as well. All right, it's visually done. It'll go all the way to the sunset, then it'll just jump back to sunrise. All right, so it's kind of a client side thing that it does, but you can make that setting. Oh, did I put it at night only? Yeah, okay, so let's do time set day. It may have been night. I may have already had that set for the video. Okay, so again, you can well, I'll show you the game rule for weather if you want to turn it off. So weather clear, and then put in 1,000,000. All right, put in 1,000,000. That's a very, very long duration, and that's the maximum you could turn it off. But that's, I think, years. I mean, that's a long time. All right, so that'll impact the particles and stuff coming from rain. But animations in general, you also have a macro setting for that where you can decrease them or you can have minimal particles. All right, now a good feature of the newest versions of Optifine for 1.16, I'm not sure if they rolled it back to other versions, is they now have introduced particle culling, which culling means that it's kind of like the smart animations. If the particles aren't on the screen, then they won't be drawn. They will be culled. All right, culled means removed from the render. All right, from the render cycle. That can have a huge impact, a large impact. So I'm glad to see that setting. I want to test it in detail to know how well it performs. All right, so reducing your particles again can have a big impact, but it also has a visual impact of a trade-off. Okay, and you could turn them all off with here if you don't even want them minimal. You could say all off, and then all your particles are gone. That's pretty extreme to do. Let's see, my particles, when I reset it back, let's go back, set it to all. So be aware of that, that it resets it. Now decrease and minimal, I believe, turns off some of these. All right, but you don't see the impact of it. All right, so having done that, we can now start to look in details at, again, a kind of extreme setting is the biome blend. All right, the biome blend, let's try to find a blend here. We should be able to see it at the desert. doesn't really blend at the desert. There's a plains back behind us somewhere. Let's see if we can't get back to it. Not sure what, I didn't pay attention to what direction I was moving in. All right, right here will show us. Okay, so this biome blend is these averaging frames between the grass colors and stuff like that. All right, so it's blending them together. If you turn that off, let's take it off. That's the fastest. It'll tell you in the tooltips. Each one of these has tooltips that'll tell you higher values may generate significant lag spikes and slow down chunk loading speed, so thus lower values are going to be less. But it's going to be very blocky like that. There's going to be no blending at all. But in play, doesn't matter as much. If you're trying to get more and more frames, then you're not going to care about that much. Another important setting recently introduced, not in quality, in details, is the entity distance. All right, so having a number of entities on the screen or in your world that's visible can create lag, a lot of lag. So you can reduce the distance that entities are shown by half and get a pretty big impact on your FPS. Now you won't see the animals and stuff as much at a distance, but presumably you'll be playing at lower render distance and stuff like that, so it's not going to matter as much. But be aware that, you know, that setting does have a pretty good impact, especially, again, if you're at a base and you have mob farms and stuff near you. You can lower that to where those mob farms aren't having as big of an impact. See, I mean, the cows are still visible to me when they're close enough for me to care about them. All right, so that is a thing for farms and stuff that you could consider setting in your settings. All right, so let's see, what else do we have? We pretty much set these how we would want, having set the fog off. Swamp colors can turn off the biome blending, and it will make the grass colors, it doesn't really have an impact on performance as much. Same thing with alternate blocks, which depends upon the resource pack. All right, held items and stuff like that you could turn off, you know, but some of this is playability, you know, how playable is it? All right, so another great big setting that you can make, guys, and this again is kind of getting extreme. We can, by the way, turn the sky off. Let's go to details. Turn the sky off, and it doesn't have a very big impact visually as much, but you know, it does have some impact on your frame rates, so that's something to consider. Doing is turning the sky off. Now again, a big setting to make, and again it's pretty extreme, is to change the resolution of Minecraft itself. All right, the display in the full screen window. This is only for the F11 full screen window when full screen is on, which F11 will do that, or you can use this button. But you have a various number of settings. So when it's set to full screen mode, that's set to your monitor resolution. Now you can change that, all right? So you can do it in decreasing steps. So all the way to the right is your full monitor resolution, then going down makes impact. So let's try, for instance, 1400, or actually I don't think that will, I want it to still be full screen. Let's try 1366 by 768 for the 16:9 ratio, where it'll still fill the screen, but now it's reducing the actual render quality. Now be aware that when you switch out of the game, like if you go to your desktop or whatever, that the display resolution will change, and then when you come back into Minecraft, the display resolution will change again. So it'll slow that a little bit, but it's actually changing your computer desktop resolution to get lower and lower values. So that makes a big impact, because again, FPS, remember, is how fast it takes to draw the frames. All right, so you can continue to go lower with that. I'll give you a set of settings that I've seen that still keeps the 16:9 ratio. The 1176, I think this one is. Yeah, this one has bars along the side, but it still is 16:9 essentially. All right, and again, you'll get bigger impact potentially as you go downward. All right, but again, the screen will look worse and worse and worse every time you do it because it's lower resolution. But maybe that doesn't matter. All right, playability is more important. Now 960 by 540 is another full screen one, and again getting lower and lower resolution. Okay, so that's pretty ugly, guys, but it is definitely more frames, you know, definitely has a stronger impact. Now keep in mind that your frames are relative, so you know, if I'm upping my frame rate and I'm getting, you know, 3000 and I lose 300 frames, then I'm losing 10%. So if you're getting 60 frames and you're losing 10%, then you're losing 6 frames. So it's relative that way. So, you know, don't think that you'll get 200 more frames, basically. All right, now I think this was the last setting that I could make that would be full screen, I think. Let me try this one, but I think that last one was the, yeah, see, that's square. So for me, your resolutions may vary a little bit. The smallest setting I could get is 960 by 540, and it'd still be full screen. All right, but that's again a pretty big step to take as far as, you know, how Minecraft looks. All right, so I'm just going to quickly review just so you could see all the settings. Graphics fast, 8 chunks, frame rate unlimited, smooth lighting off, view bobbing off, entity shadows off, brightness bright. Dynamic lights you wouldn't want on if you were worried about that. Dynamic FOV you could turn off. It's not going to have as much of a frame rate setting, but FOV itself will. All right, be aware that, you know, again, if I have my FOV, essentially I'll get a lot more frames, but it's a lot less playable. But again, in your base, you could, you know, you could live with that. All right, so under the we'll just go down this list here. Under the details, clouds off, trees default, which is linked to that fancy setting, sky off, fog off, dropped items, it doesn't really matter, default, again, you're setting it fast. Entity distance 50. Stars don't make that much of a difference, you're generally sleeping at night anyway. Show capes if you have them. The biome blend off. Okay, animations, particles minimal, or you could turn all off depending on how bad you need it. Quality maps you could turn off. All this custom skies won't matter. All this is texture pack stuff. All these settings are controlled by texture packs, okay, in that tab. Smart animations on, definitely in all cases. Fast render if you can. You probably can, because you probably won't be using shaders if you're getting trying for max FPS. Fast math can be on. Dynamic updates can be on. Dynamic updates, you could choose whether or not, but again, it'll render more chunks. So at that point, then you can start, you know, reducing your render distance. If you're still having problems, then pulling that render distance down. Every time you do it, you're going to get a big number of frame increases, but less world that you could see. Minecraft becomes less and less playable at that time. But again, if you're in a base, if you're underground, you're in a cave, doesn't matter at all. You know, you're in the end, doesn't matter. You're in a fortress. So it makes a difference. You're in a woodland mansion. You know, there's a lot of cases where, you know, you need good responsiveness and frame rates for combat, and you don't need to be seeing big chunks of the world. So you can use that as a speed setting, essentially, to adjust it as you need. Anyway, guys, I've gone over the settings. We got an ugly Minecraft now. Looks a lot like alpha days, but got good frame rates and sometimes beauty over function. Remember that, guys. So thanks or wait, I said that backwards. Function over beauty. Yes. All right. Anyway, this is Gatomado, guys. Thanks so much for watching. If you like, please leave a like. Consider subscribing to the channel, guys, for more tutorials and all kinds of Minecraft stuff. And I do so much appreciate you watching. Have a great day. This is Gatomado. Bye-bye.